Hello, this is Jay Mitchell, and we are back with another episode of Libertarian Uncensored podcast, going over all the posts on Libertarian Censored subreddit. Let's get right into it. So first we have, the Trump administration is still fighting to keep billions in illegal tariff revenue from Reason.com, posted by Jai Porcupine. And yeah, personally, I don't think the government should do tariffs at all. As I say in pretty much every episode, tariffs is just a form of taxation, and all taxation is inherently theft if it's not consensual, and a tariff is just a tax on imported goods. With that being said, ultimately, if the government has the ability to justify putting up a tariff, they can take any tariff money they want to, and oftentimes there's nothing you can do about it since they have the monopoly of the legal use of force on their side. If they want to take your money for whatever reason they want to, oftentimes they can do it because they're in a position of authority to do so. Next we have, let's talk more about what happened to the USS Liberty in 1967, posted by Jacob Anders, and that's a crosspost from the Anders for President subreddit, and it looks like a tweet. Thomas Massey will honor the USS Liberty crew in Congress on June 8th. Israel killed 34 Americans while attacking the USS Liberty in 1967, injuring 171 more. IPAC says speaking about the event is anti-Semitic. And yeah, personally, just goes to show you that, a lot of countries, if they were to bomb or missile strike a U.S. naval carrier, the U.S. would have none of it. But since Israel is the U.S. is so up Israel's ass, Israel can do it, and they'll just sweep it under the rug. And it just goes to show you that, ultimately, those in the position of, when they're so ingrained into our foreign policy, they can get away with pretty much anything they want to, and oftentimes there's nothing you can do about it. I personally don't really care for Israel. I don't think the U.S. should be bombing Israel or anything like that, because, I just think the U.S. should be completely out of it and altogether. If Israel wants to go to war constantly with its neighbors, that's fine. They can justify whatever they want to. But ultimately, the U.S. should have no role in its conflicts. But unfortunately, the Israel lobby is one of the most powerful ones in the city, chock full of them. And I think that's important to remember as well. If what the Israeli government wants, it usually gets, and especially when it comes to Washington D.C. Next, we have, Trump denies campaign push to finish endless wars. I didn't promise anything, from thehill.com, posted by Jai Porcupine. And yeah, personally, I would disagree with that. I think on the campaign trail he said no new wars, and then when he got into power, it was suddenly he pushed for new wars. And just go to show you, a lot of politicians will say one thing on the campaign trail and then do the opposite in office, all while gaslighting you and saying, oh, I didn't promise anything. And just go to show you can't take a politician at their word. There are a few good ones like Thomas Massey or Rand Paul, but they're much more the exception rather than the rule. Next we have, veteran sues over deeply corrupt Trump UFC birthday plan, from thedailybeast.com, posted by Woke Boogeyman, and that's crosspost from the entertainment subreddit. And yeah, personally, if a veteran wants to sue over Trump's UFC birthday, Trump having a UFC event at the White House on his birthday, I think he should be able to. But, ultimately, as I think the Libertarian position, as long as it's privately funded, it should be very much, he should be able to do it if he wants to. And yeah, I think it's interesting, John McCain, just two Republican nominees before Trump, wanted to ban UFC entirely, and then Trump has him right in the backyard. It goes to show you how, ultimately, I think Libertarian positions, if they want to do UFC, wherever they want to do it, they should be able to. But, ultimately, I don't think it should be entitled to any government funding, and that's my thoughts on that issue. Next we have, Mormon senators outraged the cult they viciously defended in support no longer acknowledges their religion, posted by Donald Key, and that's a crosspost from the Lepers Ate My Face subreddit. And yeah, personally, it just goes to show you that, you can support someone, but they'll turn on you if there's ever an opportune time to do so. Ultimately, you always have to be question who your allies are in the fight for liberty, and I think that's very important to remember. They can turn on you any second, just like the GOP did with the Mormons, and no longer recognizing their specific faith as an official really recognized religion for the military. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next we have, people who voted for Trump seriously thought something different would happen this time, posted by DIYU, and that's a crosspost from the anarcho-capitalism subreddit. And it's a meme. Who's benefiting from Trump's failed Iran war? Israel getting the U.S. to do their dirty work. Russia raking in huge oil profits. Trump family getting huge war contracts. Who's losing? American people dying overseas and paying for it all. Military families living with fear, loss, and uncertainty. Working Americans, higher cost, fewer priorities at home. Funny how the people making decisions aren't the ones paying the price. And then they added, and if asked, they'll tell you they'd vote for him all over again if given the chance. MAGA down votes incoming. And yeah, it just goes to show you that, ultimately the state's going to enrich itself, and they'll use divisive culture war issues like LGBTQ and abortion to divide people. Well, in reality, as George Carlin famously said, big club, you ain't in it, and that's very much what's happening. Trump is very much seeking to enrich himself and his allies, while screwing over the common man, and that's very much what politics is. It's very much the elites trying to screw over the underclass as much as possible, and yeah, and that's my thoughts on that issue. And it kind of reminds me of a post. I want to bring up a post I did to the Libertarian Party USA subreddit. I said, "Is the greater threat to liberty from the top or the bottom?" I said, "I know this is a topic a lot of libertarians simply split on. I would argue that both rich people and poor people can both be anti-libertarian. The rich are in a position where they have more economic and social capital and enforce their values than others. This isn't total to say that all rich people are inherently authoritarian. You do have some more libertarian ones like Peter Thiel or Jeffrey Yass, but even they are in a position of using their wealth to influence the state. I know a common retort is that, well, poor people are on government welfare and rich people aren't. I would argue that the rich are oftentimes just as much on welfare as the poor are. It's just labeled as corporate subsidies instead." Thoughts. And then one user, PlaneTrust2491, replied, "There's the political class and there's the economic class. The threat is from the political class." And I replied that the political class and the economic class are often intertwined. Back in the early 2010s, you had Occupy Wall Street saying that all our problems were the result of big business, and the Tea Party saying that all our problems were the result of big government. In reality, the two are oftentimes one and the same. This is why they started pushing divisive cultural issues like drag queens jerking off in front of kids to keep people divided. And yeah, it just goes to show you that, ultimately, those in the positions of authority are oftentimes those with more economic and social capital. I think that's important to remember as well. I'm not a communist or a socialist, I would say. Ultimately, sometimes people are going to have more economic and social capital than others, and oftentimes there's nothing you can do about it. But, ultimately, it's important to realize who is really calling the shots, and oftentimes that will be those in the position of state authority, and who are usually going to be connected to those in the positions of economic authority. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next we have, posted by Jacob Anders, and that looks like a meme from a screenshot from Dragon Ball. It says, "Lols are threats made by the dominant socioeconomic ethnic group in a given nation. It's just the promise of violence that's enacted in police or basically an occupying army." You know what I mean? And I would agree with that. Ultimately, lols are just whatever the government says they are, and oftentimes there's nothing you can do about it. If the government wants to enact any law they feel like, they can justify it, and oftentimes laws are just words written down on a piece of paper. What matters is how they're enforced. But ultimately, when the government wants to enforce something, it's the law. But when an individual does it, it's crime. And it just goes to show you that it's ultimately very much about between the haves and the have-nots in regards to who's in the position of state authority at any given moment. Next we have, a foreign gov is usurping the U.S. presidency's powers over the U.S. military through an IPAC written 224 NDAA. The executive who will be accounted to implement 224 NDAA will be a Zionist with dual citizenship. Call your representatives. Act now to shut down this takeover of the U.S. military. Posted by Jamjar0070, and that's a crosspost from the Know the Truth Matters subreddit. I guess it's a clip of them talking about that on TikTok or something. I don't know. It's 30 minutes, so I don't know if I'm going to watch all that. But yeah, I definitely do think, Trump is very much complicit in all this. He's really the one who's up Israel's ass the most. So I wouldn't be defending him at all. They're trying to wash away his responsibility. A foreign government is usurping the U.S. presidency's powers. When in reality, I would say Trump is very much complicit in all that. But regardless, it just goes to show you that, ultimately, those when someone has economic and social capital to do something, they'll usually find a way to do it. And Israel definitely has a lot of social and economic capital in regards to its control over the United States. And I think that's something that's important to remember. And I always like whenever you say that, say, oh, that's anti-Semitic. Well, in reality, ultimately, those in position, if you want to say it's anti-Semitic, that's fine, but anti-Semitic is just another word like racist, sexist, misogynistic, homophobic, etc., that they'll use to discredit your arguments, all while not calling them out directly. It's like the progressive does when they don't like you, what you say. They'll say racist, sexist, homophobic. And they won't do anything. They won't actually address your arguments beyond that. It's just name calling. I think that's important to remember as well. Next we have Epstein abused them. The Justice Department exposed them. Now they're under attack by haters from Reuters.com, posted by Jai Porcupine. And yeah, personally, I don't really care for Epstein or the Justice Department. But, ultimately, they were in a position of authority. Well, Epstein was in a position of authority before they offed him. They'll say, oh, Epstein killed himself. But, why were the prison door, why were the cameras off, and why were the guards distracted, and why were the prison doors wide open? I personally think they probably hired some muscle to take him out. Some people say, oh, it was Trump who did it. Some people say it was Clintons. But, it's a big club, you ain't in it. But regardless, ultimately, I don't really care for Epstein and his sex trafficking operations, but, ultimately it just goes to show you that, the elite class is pretty much capable of doing whatever it wants to, and oftentimes there's nothing you can do about it. When Epstein wore out his usefulness, they had him offed, and I think that's important to remember as well. Ultimately, I think he was really just a tool of the Israeli Mossad, the Israeli version of the CIA, to get blackmail on the elites, and apparently it worked really well, because now Trump's so far up Israel's ass that, he might as well be more the Prime Minister of Israel than the President of the United States. Next we have Neil Gorsuch on the Declaration of Independence, Originalism and Separation of Powers, from Reason.com, posted by Jai Porcupine. And yeah, personally, I think Neil Gorsuch is one of the better Supreme Court justices. Of course, Reddit doesn't like him because he's more out-group coded than in-group coded since Trump appointed him. But yeah, personally, I do think, the Libertarian position on the Supreme Court is that, just because the Supreme Court says something doesn't mean you have to abide by it. And that should be the Libertarian position on any branch of government. Just because the government says something doesn't mean you have to abide by it. Just by doing whatever you want to. Don't let daddy government tell you what you can and can't do. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next we have, you play right into their hands with this stuff. You're either cooked or you're stupid. President Donald J. Trump, posted by Noam Sane, and that's a YouTube video from NBC News. Trump says, I'd pay anti-weaponization fund applicants the kind of money they deserve. And yeah, personally, if Trump wants to give taxpayer dollars to people who stormed the Capitol on January 6th, I personally wouldn't care for that. But, ultimately, the U.S. government can justify throwing money at wherever it feels like, and oftentimes there's nothing you can do about it. That's why in my ideal system, I would say, people should be able to decide whether to pay taxes or not. Ideally, all government welfare would be paid for voluntary taxation. People choose what income groups they should be sent. That should be true for pretty much any issue in regards to taxation. It should be voluntary, and the taxpayer should get to choose exactly where the money goes to. But sadly, that's not how it is currently. You're forced to pay taxes, and the government can just throw whatever the taxpayer dollars at whatever bullshit it wants to, and oftentimes there's nothing you can do about it. Next we have Stephen Miller and Pete Hegseth are wildly misleading about Section 702 warrantless surveillance from Reason.com, posted by Jai Porcupine. And yeah, personally, I don't really care for that, but ultimately, it just goes to show you that people are going to act in their own self-interest, and oftentimes there's nothing you can do about it. Next we have transgender ballot initiative could require genital exams for Washington secondary school students. The legislations are safety for molesters from QUOW.org, posted by Woke Boogeyman. And yeah, personally, I don't really care for that, but ultimately, if the state wants to inspect your genitals, they can justify that. Ultimately, I think it's interesting. I like what this Serenity Now 31 says in the comments. If you read the link, the claim is that the physical is already required, and the physical already is used to determine gender. So, ultimately, if they're already doing a physical, if they want to examine your genitals as well, they can justify it. It's just the culture war issues that Reddit constantly buys into all the time. Transgenderism, back in 2012, no one cared about transgenderism. Then the legacy media started pushing it relentlessly with people like Laverne Cox and Caitlyn Jenner, and now nobody can shut the fuck up about it. And I think that's important to remember as well. Just because the media constantly talks about an issue doesn't mean it's actually a real issue. And yeah, personally, it's I'm sure if we said if I said we gotta get the government out of physicals altogether, Reddit would say no. They do have to have physical exams at some point, and it just goes to show you that they'll despite whatever the current culture war issue is, they'll always say, oh, the right's the one pushing culture war, but the left likes to push culture war as well, especially in regards to they want to make misgendering illegal and have drag queens jerking off in front of kids, and it just goes to show you it's all just a ploy to keep people distracted from the ruling class and keep each other's throats, and that's my thoughts on that issue. Next we have Armorus is the stage manager of Escalation, not Israel, from the Dow, posted by the Dowcast, and that's cross-post from the TrueAnon subreddit, and that looks like a YouTube video from Anthony M, who posted 666 equals Mars 360 escalated rocket fire from Gaza into Israel. And then they added a bunch of schizo stuff about how in the last 7 years it was predicted that the high civilization rocket fire against Israel from the calendar year would occur during a time when Mars would be within 30 degrees of the lunar node. Here are the dates of Mars/lunar node alignment for the past 6 years. And yeah, personally, I think that's just kind of a schizo post. But if you want to do schizo posting, online, you should be able to. Ultimately, if you want to say that, Israel is completely reliant on the alignment of Mars, you should be able to, but ultimately, I personally think you should probably use some more logical things rather than relying on astrology. But rely on whatever thing you want to. That's the libertarian way. Next we have, I would like to share our new website posted by County Watch, and that's the link to countywatch.co, and they said, hello all, we just launched this website starting out in California for beta testing. We list all new developments in California like data centers, flock cameras, housing developments, etc., and let our users send emails to the appropriate party for your support or oppose. We are completely neutral on each project and believe it's in the best interest to let the community decide if they support or oppose the project. We'd love to get your all's thoughts. We have a lot of cool features coming, and yeah, I think that's cool. If people want to justify making a website like that, I think they should be able to. Libertarian positions, people should make whatever website they want for whatever reason they want. Next we have, going through my old photos, this one is at least 15 years old and still relevant, posted by FlimsyOut5563, and that's a meme. It says old logo, it's the U.S. presidential seal with the eagle and the eagle on it, and it's new logo, it's a picture of a condom. It says, official announcement, the government today announced that it's changing its emblem from an eagle to a condom because it more accurately reflects the government's political stance. A condom allows for inflation, halts production, destroys next generation, protects a bunch of dicks, and gives you a sense of security while you're actually being screwed. Damn it, just doesn't get more accurate than that. And I would agree with that. Ultimately, those in positions of authority, they're just going to look out for themselves first and foremost, always screwing everyone else over, and the U.S. government is a good example of that. And that's my thoughts on that issue. So I think we're going to wrap it up there. I'll see you guys in the next episode. Bye.